Welcome back to the Clemson Insider. I'm Will Vandervoort. That's Gavin Oliver as we get you set for Tiger Talk here on the Clemson Insider. Gavin, it's been an eventful couple days. We've talked to, obviously, yesterday, Jeff Scott and Brent Venables. I think James Skowski, Isaiah Simmons also came to media availability. And then, of course, today we had Dabo Swinney on Tuesday here. And, it's been a kind of a crazy, it's a good thing for us because I know the fans hate the bye weeks as much as we do, but we really hate the bye weeks because we only get the players and coaches for one day. We don't get Dabo. And so it's really like, doing what we do for a living. We enjoy being able to talk to players and coaches.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that 1 week a year? It's just kind of weird just not having that weekly Tuesday Dabo press conference that you're so used to. So all life is back to normal this week.
Yeah, all life is good.
Yeah, everything's good.
Until the week before South Carolina game, and then we have another one.
Yeah, man, it's going to throw me off again.
I know, it's going to throw me off too, especially right before South Carolina. That's nuts, But anyway, that's what the calendar happens, and it falls that way for us every 4 or 5 years, I think it is, when it happens. So, but anyway, we'll dive into kind of some things we heard today. And Gavin, we wondered how Dabo was going to handle the media. For those of you who maybe haven't been on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or ESPN in the last several weeks, ever since Clemson almost lost, didn't lose, but almost lost to North Carolina, it's been, hey, what's wrong with Clemson? Why, and it's sort of been like this flavor of the month for Clemson as everybody has criticized them. All of a sudden, Clemson played 4 games where they dominated their opponent. I didn't say they played great, but they dominated their opponents. They won those games by an average of 32.3 points. And then they have one game where they were on the road against a conference foe they hadn't played in a while. And, North Carolina, I'll be honest, man, they brought it. They played a very good game. And all of a sudden, Clemson is considered something's wrong with them. All of a sudden, Clemson looks like 2014 Florida State, who opened the season with like 4 games where they won by a touchdown or less, and against teams that were average 6-6. Oklahoma State that year they opened the season with like a 6-point win. Clemson didn't have that. They beat the snot out of Texas A&M a few weeks before. Everybody was talking about how great they were, and now all of a sudden Clemson's not in the playoffs anymore. They're not. They're kind of back there with Florida and those guys. Is what some of the people said. Like, what? So you wondered how Dabo Swinney was going to use that this week. Yesterday, we heard what Skowski said. He came out kind of mad. Isaiah Simmons came out mad. Even Trevor Lawrence said something. And then today, what does Dabo Swinney do, Gavin?
Well, yeah, I don't think Dabo Swinney's mad about all this criticism and doubt. I think he's actually smiling behind the scenes. I think he's really loving all this doubt and criticism because it's given him an opportunity to go back to what he said last October when he first stated that Clemson is on the Roy bus, the rest of y'all bus. He said Alabama's on the big-time bus, and Clemson's on the rest of y'all bus, with an allusion to when he was a walk-on in Alabama, and him and the third-string guys, the backups, were all on the rest of y'all bus, and the starters were on the big bus, and that's what he said last October. And now, you know what? During this bye week, after all this criticism, after the close win at North Carolina, he went back, is what he said today during his press conference. He went back to the shed. He got the tarp off the Roy bus, and you know what? Clemson's back on it. He changed the oil in that Roy bus. He washed it. He pumped up the tires. He fluffed up the seats. He said he had a great quote today just about how he went back and kind of dusted off the Roy bus, and they're back on it now. He says.
Well, I want to know, Gavin, where Dabo Swinney gets his oil change, because I want one of those $5 oil changes again. I haven't been to one of those in a while. I don't know, maybe if you're the head football coach at Clemson, you get a few discounts here and there. Mine usually costs around maybe add a 0 on the end of that 5.
So Dabo really, he joked around about that today, and that's how he's using it to motivate his team. He's saying that Clemson's back, with all the haters. They're kind of in the rest of y'all now, but in all seriousness, he did say that he loves that Clemson that people are talking about Clemson, that people, whether the attention is positive or negative, whether people are saying, "Oh, Clemson stinks," or "Oh, Clemson's great," he really likes the attention on the program. He likes that people are talking about Clemson because he says, that means we matter. That means the programs matter. He says they're not focused on all that stuff. They're focused on trying to be the best they can be each week. But he knows it's fun, and that's the way he's looking at it.
Well, I understand what he's saying, and I know the players aren't focused on it, but they obviously are, because at least from a standpoint that they've mentioned it. When years past when a reporter has asked them about the hearsay that's going on out there, they'll say, well, we don't worry about that. We just focus on the next opponent. We move on. I mean, you've heard that. I've heard that. I mean, Deshaun Watson, I think that's something he had scribed on tattooed on his arm or something, so he never forgot that's what he needed to say. But yesterday, Trevor Lawrence is asked about it, and Trevor Lawrence basically says, hey, it's great that, what everybody's saying. And he's like, at least now, it's great not being number one anymore, because at least now we know that, everybody thinks we're the team that's always going to mess up or something like that. I'm kind of messing that quote up a little bit, but he wasn't very happy about it. You could tell the way they were being talked about out there by the national media. And I guess, and Isaiah Simmons had a comment he came out and said about it. Skowski talked about how, nobody wants little old Clemson to be dominating like they've been doing. So it's really was the theme of the week, I think. And I think Dabo kind of, on his own today, nobody brought that up to Dabo Swinney. He brought that up on his own. And so it tells me that they were actually really, mad about some of the comments that were said. And I'll give you a little bit of history here real fast. So I was watching the ACC Digital Network Monday night, and the ACC Network on TV the other night, and they had a throwback to the Florida State-Clemson game. So Clemson was a 3-3 football team. Florida State was number one in the country on the road at Death Valley. Bowden Bowl won, right? 86,000, biggest crowd ever in Death Valley history. Clemson ends up missing a field goal. First of all, it was up 14-3, keep in mind, and then misses a field goal at the end that would have put it into overtime against number one Florida State. Well, guess where Florida State was ranked the next week, Gavin? I went and looked it up. Guess where they were ranked the very next week?
Where were they ranked? What?
They were ranked number one. They didn't lose their ranking. Nobody said, oh, what's wrong with Florida State? And I looked at their other scores. They had a couple other games in there where they barely won. They had some tough games. And they never lost their ranking the entire year, as they became the first team in the modern poll era to go through an entire season undefeated and stay number one in the country. Now, that didn't happen for Clemson this year because they struggled out on the road against North Carolina. So guess what? Why didn't Clemson stay number one? Yeah. I don't know why. And then not only that, and I think this is what me personally think the players got mad about, was that Clemson this week was idle. Alabama this week was idle. Yet Alabama stole Clemson's 10 first place votes in the coaches poll, and then they stole Clemson's 3 first place votes in the writers poll. Both teams were off. What changed between 1 and 2 when both teams didn't play? It's supposed to be based on what you did that week, right? And so each week is different. Well, neither team played. They were both 1 and 2. Why in the world do you do that, other than why the players and coaches are probably mad?
Well, all this whole conversation gets back to the fact that before the season, Clemson, everybody was wondering how Clemson, everybody thought Clemson was going to roll through the entire schedule, roll over everybody.
Including us.
Yeah, including us. And they had one blip on the radar against North Carolina, but everybody was wondering, Dabo, is he going to find a way to play that disrespect card this year? And everybody kind of didn't know for sure. But, of course, this has given Dabo a great opportunity to play that disrespect card to his team, keep his team motivated, make sure his guys have a chip on their shoulders. He was that little struggle at North Carolina. He's glad they came out with a win, but he's also, I think, secretly, glad they were tested and glad they had that adversity, because now it's causing all the people to question them, and he's able to he's like I said, play that disrespect card again. It's played right into his hands.
Absolutely. I remember Eric McLean talked about that, how that they were talking about that same thing you did on one of their all ACC shows or whatever, and Eric laughed and he says, guys, it's us. We're the ones. He says, whatever we say negative, Coach Swinney's going to take that and he's going to put it right in front of the players. He's like, I know because I was there. And so Eric called it right. That's exactly what Dabo's done. He's used this as his calling card for years, and he likes playing that underdog role as much as he can. Clemson's not an underdog. Let's put that out. They're definitely not an underdog. However, I do believe there is a little disrespect when it comes to little old Clemson. There's something to that. And I know some people in the media make fun of that when Dabo says that and some players say that, but I think they have a case. I really do. I don't think Alabama, if Alabama were to play Ole Miss that same day they were playing, and Alabama was number one, and Alabama, say, won by a point or a field goal or something, I guarantee you Alabama stays number one in the country. I guarantee you they do.
Yeah.
I think there's something to that. It might be because Alabama's sitting up there and, everybody thinks what they think of Alabama, and deservedly so, for what they've done the last 10 years. Maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know. But regardless, it is what it is. It happened. Dabo's going to use it, and, it'll be the fuel that fires this team, I think, for the rest of the year. However, there is a football game to talk about.
Yeah.
The Tigers do play Florida State on Saturday in Death Valley, 3:30 kickoff. This is a game, Gavin, that years ago was the game in the ACC. Clemson and Florida State, Dabo brought that up today, have won. One of the two of them has won the ACC Atlantic Division every year since 2009, I believe. And they've won the championship every year since 2011. But yes, that's true. But right now, Clemson has owned the other side of this rivalry.
Yeah, they have. They sure have. But despite that, I mean, Clemson, Dabo's making sure his guys take this game seriously this week. He knows the division historically has gone through Florida State. You got to win that game in order to win the division. He's telling his guys, that's one of our goals this year, win the division. That starts this week. You got to win this game in order to accomplish your goals. All the goals are on the table right now, so they need to take care of business. And he's also making sure his guys take Seminoles seriously. He told me today, this is by far the most talented team that Clemson has faced this season. He said it's not even close. Easily the most talented team. Everybody's talking right now about how well Clemson's recruiting and how they got the number one class in the country. They're just killing it on the recruiting trail. But he pointed out the fact that over the last decade, Florida State has out-recruited Clemson at least, he said maybe all but 2 times over the last decade as Clemson had a better recruiting class than Florida. He said over 5 of the last 7 years, Florida State's had a better class. So he's telling his guys, these guys have talent. You better come ready to play if you're going to win that and win this game on Saturday.
Well, they do have a lot of talent. And to me, last year they beat North Carolina. They beat Florida State by 49 points down there in Tallahassee. Okay. That ain't happening again, folks. That was just one of those things where there was a lot of cancer still as Willie Taggart's trying to clean things up out there, and the players kind of gave up at that point. Mm-hmm. And I think Clemson, if they get on them early, can maybe put a little bit of that seed back in Florida State's head a little bit. Mm-hmm. But the guys, it seems like to me, these Florida State players are playing harder this year for Willie Taggart. And I think you've seen that the last couple of weeks. And let's keep things in perspective. NC State doesn't look like a very good football team right now, but that was a big confidence builder for Florida State as a team, for their defense and their offense to work together and play a complete game where they haven't really done that this year. So they're feeling a little confident about themselves. They went into the bye week feeling that, getting a little bit of the juices going. And Clemson struggled against North Carolina, and so that was probably a good thing for Clemson because they're going to play a more talented team this week that's going to come in and play hard and probably will not roll over like they did a year ago. And so they're going to have to play 4 quarters of football. I don't think it's, if you're coming into Death Valley, and that's why I saw the spread was 27 points to open up with, and I'm like, what? Yeah. This is Florida State. I mean, I don't care. I mean, they're still, like Dabo says, I agree with Dabo, there's still a lot of talent in Tallahassee. Good enough talent to beat Clemson if Clemson doesn't play a good football game. And Dabo said that today. The one thing that stood out to me was Dabo says, we have to win the turnover battle. And he wasn't just saying it like, it's cliche. He was saying it legitimately because Florida State likes to create a lot of turnovers. They cause a lot of turnovers. They lead the ACC in that category. And they feed off those turnovers. You look at every game Florida State's played, they fed off turnovers to get their points. If Clemson turns the ball over and loses the turnover battle like they did against North Carolina, or if they're even like they were against Charlotte, then they're in trouble. And Dabo, I think Clemson's +1 in the turnover or -1 in the turnover battle right now. He says they got to if they don't play good enough football and they turn the ball over too much, they could be in trouble on Saturday. He said they have to win the turnover margin because if it's vice versa, they could be in trouble.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you mentioned Clemson being a 27-point favorite. If you're just looking at the sheer talent on each side, Clemson, obviously has a ton of talent, and they made. I'm not saying they're not more talented than Florida State, but I am saying they're not 27 points more talented than Florida State. If you get what I'm saying, I mean, if you factor in coaching and stuff like that, then maybe I could see being a 27-point favorite. But I mean, just based on talent, they've got some dudes over there, as Dabo likes to say.
They do. What else, as far as Coach Sweeney or anything else you heard for the week that kind of stood out to you that we haven't? I know there was Dabo mentioned, as you mentioned, the recruiting part earlier, the recruiting angle.
I think Dabo, one thing important that he said was just that this is one of the best injury reports he's seen today. You know, one of the cleanest injury reports. He mentioned a couple guys that they're without, but for the most part, he really likes where the team is at from a health standpoint. Coming off the bye week came at the right time, giving the Tigers a chance to heal up and get ready for the stretch run in the second half of the season.
And I guess the key is going to be what's the mental health of the Clemson Tigers this week? Are they done? You know, whatever that was at North Carolina, where they just weren't there. We've heard Skowski said this week that he thought they had, when he went back and thought about it, that the practices weren't that good last week leading up to North Carolina. Trevor Lawrence said the same thing. Jeff Scott actually said that either the Tuesday practice or the Wednesday practice, they didn't even get through their whole scripted because it just wasn't a very good practice. And so obviously, you know, when you hindsight's 2020, you go back and look, it's like, yeah, there were the signs. But, you know, Trevor Lawrence said last week they were very crisp in their practice, had 2 tough practices, and he feels like they're ready to go and that they'll practice good this week. When I talked about last week, I mean the bye week. He feels like they'll be ready to go this week. We'll see. But stay tuned to the Clemson Insider all week. We'll have coverage leading up to this Saturday's game against the Seminoles. We'll see you on the other side.